Land-sea interaction extending inland and towards the marine spaces are affected by major management and design transformations. In the specific fields of network maritime analysis, a consolidating approach is that according to which the poles of the land-sea system are progressively acquiring a regional influence. It was first maritime economics, together with maritime geography, that theorized the so-called port regionalization phenomenon, showing how ports are moving beyond their maritime facilities and traditional operative perimeters by boosting the transport system towards inland regions. This complex set of processes, though, is not immaterial, but has tangible impacts that spill over spaces. The increasingly regional nature of the land-sea junctions has introduced not only the notion of port region, but also the concept of port system, or rather port cluster. This cluster is both an empirical and conceptual construct. It is used to describe conurbation, interconnected networks, concentration of firms having a high degree of collaboration. Large-scale and cross-border projects take cluster into account to talk about networks and innovative milieu. Economic and geographical disciplines employ the notion of cluster to refer to a geographically close group of interconnected companies. In the port sector, with the port clusterization phenomenon, we mean the administrative aggregation of two or more single ports that, active in the same region, have been institutionally merged to form a port cluster. Nonetheless, the idea of cluster seems, for the time being, to ignore space. In other words, its spatial implication and potential application in urban and territorial design still appear quite overlooked. The clustering process consists of an intense spatial stretching, a physical and relational expansion of coastal and marine spaces that become polycentric, interlinked, multidimensional, and pooled. Implying a new kind of spatial engagement, this stretching generates new spatial patterns of functional relation for city territories and architectures. This spatial clustering highlights the latent potential of the territories and increasingly motivate a study on the so-called port cluster landscape, namely the spatial product of the port clusterization phenomenon. From this, the research part of this contribution question the lack of the spatial component design approach to port cluster and aim as a goal to investigate the spatial impacts introduced by port cluster on territories in order to study them in the field of architectural and urban design. Considering the European framework, we can already preliminarily note a port system in which the cluster regime was introduced about 20 years ago or so. In this long-established and noteworthy port cluster, we can therefore detect advanced stage of clustering, which can offer important examples of reference and comparison. In parallel, in other countries, like in Italy, we can observe evolving port clusters, relatively recently established systems, which are therefore an expression of an early stage of clustering. This is the case, just to give an example, of Italy, where in 2016, a law introduced the 16 port system authorities, merging the 62 previous single ports in the 16 port system. The ongoing research studies the port cluster landscape by building and employing an indicator system to record the port cluster landscape, spatial and morphological impacts, namely those that are affecting the form, the shape and the scale of contemporary port city territories. The indicator system of the morphological spatial impact is created with the intention of to support the spatial turn process that is affecting anthropic territories and, of course, technical land-sea ones. Intended as an evaluation tool, the indicator system will be structured following a knowledge phase conducted with another tool, the questionnaire, a data collection tool. The questionnaire will address the Italian port system authorities, so the 16 government bodies currently involved in the management and planning and transformation of the national port system. It will be disseminated thanks to the operational collaboration established very recently between the University of Genoa and the Association of Italian Ports Assoporti, which can that can act as a vector within the Italian port network. And the question, as you can see in this slide, is divided in 6 main sections addressing topics like governance, planning, future perspective, and the construction of a glossary to define and describe the port cluster landscape configuration. As a new spatial and institutional entity, the port cluster landscape can help to expand the knowledge on port cluster planning by emphasizing how the cluster's relational strength and pervasiveness are leaping deep in the imprints of space. To do so, the research identifies a set of parameters to be used as input for the construction of the questionnaire and, of course, of the indicator system. Among the parameters, as you can see in this slide, for example, the one of the optimization highlights how within the cluster's poles the use of space and researchers can be pooled. And other parameters, very important, are complementarity, rationalization, inclusiveness, and proximity, all highlighting not only the criticalities, but also the potentiality and opportunities that the cluster can introduce in port city architecture and port city architectural and urban design. On the basis of these parameters that are applicable and verifiable in different port contexts in Europe and beyond, a very first selection of spatial impacts introduced by the cluster can be drawn up. You can see here a very first list of impacts, like, for example, degree of sea-land connectivity, proximity, inclusiveness on firms and industries, port to city or land to sea engine graph points, infrastructure sharing and rationalization. The topic of port cluster certainly belongs to the field of interest of public institutions on a local and territorial scale. The case of Asst is a specific example of direct involvement and strong alliance between academia and public actors, but also it is strongly connected to the sphere of scientific and academic research. The group Port City Future Group, based in the Netherlands, and the Coastal Design Integrated Design Studio, based instead in University of Genoa, are confirming this. The research aims to take the open discussion then to an higher level by framing the research into the European framework and policies, in particular the New European Bauhaus Initiative and the Next Generation Europe Recovery Package. In fact, the research addressed some of the goals established in the AHEP, which is the network of the worldwide network of Port City 2030 agenda, adapted from the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. To conclude, by linking the reasoning of port clusters to study on planetary urbanization, urban age, urbanization of the sea, allows first to conceive the cluster as a space. The cluster offers then an unprecedented design filter that goes beyond the very valid concept of system, thus attributing a surface, an horizontal impact and polycentric impact to the new cluster reality. Finally, the cluster is an inclusive spatial device that, trying to undermine the deep-rooted process which has often fueled the operational strategies of port out, city in, acts as a priority on the conflicts of the port city and land sea interface. Thanks for your attention.